This is a really nice Chironomid pattern. I'm tying it on a size 16 scud hook with an appropriate size silver bead at the top. Usually I'm going to tie this at an 18 or a 20. I'm just doing it a little bit better so you can see it a little bit better on the video. I'm going to start by sliding that bead back around the back because we're going to do some work up front. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach my thread here at the front. Get that nice and secure. And I'm going to bring it back forward about halfway. We're going to grab our scissors. We're going to just go ahead and remove that excess thread right there. For the white overhang over the eye of the hook, I'm just going to use some white Z yarn. What's kind of important is when you pull out that chunk is to kind of comb it out so you don't have a lot of tangle and knots in it. I'm going to go ahead and tie that in. I don't care how far over the top of the hook this ends up going because we're going to be clipping it off anyway. Most importantly, we just want to get this secured down to our hook. See, I've got a nice glob of wax there, which will kind of mitigate a little bit. Go ahead and tie back a little just to secure the material. I don't want to build too much bulk here because we've got to slide that bead over the top. I want to make sure that that white Z yarn is remaining on top of the shank of our hook, and I'm just going to tie this in to right behind the eye of the hook. And with that, again, I'm going to tightly wrap, coming back down. At this point, I'm going to grab my scissors and we'll go ahead and cut off the back end of this. I like to kind of cut it on an angle if I can to create more of a taper to make that bead slide on a little bit easier. Once that's clipped off, I'm just going to go ahead and take some tight turns, moving backwards, just securing this material in. There's some shaggy bits hanging out here. I can be a perfectionist at times, but I'm not going to worry too much about it right at the moment because that's all going to be covered up by other material. With that, we're going to go ahead and whip finish and then remove our thread and begin the rest of the fly. So I'll just take a couple of turns here, let that off, grab my thread cutter, then we can slide our bead right up over what we just tied, right up until we're right behind the eye of the hook here. At this point, you can go ahead and grab your scissors and cut this to length, give us that traditional Chironomid look. Now we're ready to go ahead and start on the body. I'm going to use some red thread here because I want the bottom half of this to be a nice bright red color. The top will be black, so I've tied a few patterns lately that are kind of showcasing that red and black look. We'll go ahead and remove that thread. And because I want to keep this Chironomid body fairly slim, I'm going to go ahead and tie in a material right here. Once we're finished with the thread work, I'm just going to take some of this synthetic Semperfli quill material. It's in a small size. I like this. Usually I like to use natural quill, but in this particular case I need the transparency and the translucent, and you can see that other than the dark top, this is pretty clear. That'll allow the colors on this pattern to kind of show through. So we're going to go ahead and tie this in, kind of hook it around there, get it secured. Then I'm just going to continue on down the hook. Again, this just allows me to keep this with a pretty thin profile, which is what you want in a Chironomid. And I take this fairly deep around the bend of the hook here. Should do us nicely. And I'm just going to slowly work my way back up, trying to cover up some of those gaps, since I didn't take my time and take touching turns on this. At this point I can certainly turn my vise and cut the butt end of that synthetic quill off. We'll transition to black, but for right now I want to take this red thread up quite a little ways. Don't worry if it goes too far, because you'll just cover it up with a black thread. So from here I'm going to be done with my red thread, so we're going to go ahead and just grab our whip finisher, get that secured. Just like that. Then we'll take our thread cutter and remove our red thread. Now right behind the bead, I'm going to start attaching my black thread. Both this red and the black thread here that I'm using is 14-aught shear thread. And that's about as far down as I want to go with that. I'm going to go ahead and remove that tag end of my thread. I'm going to build a small taper running up to behind the eye of the, not the hook, but behind the bead. Next we'll go start with our synthetic quill. I'm actually going to attach this to some hackle pliers at the very end. This stuff is a lot more forgiving than a natural quill. They break really easily. So we're going to take our first couple of wraps here, right back where we started with our red thread. I'm going to want these to be overlapping, one right in front of the other. That's going to give us that nice ribbed look when we're finished, and the material will get a little bit thicker as we move up the body here of the fly. That little black stripe runs along the top of this synthetic quill will actually help us create that nice look of a ribbing or a segmentation here. We're going to take this right up to behind the bead. Going to do us just fine. We'll remove our thread from our bobbin cradle, move our bobbin cradle out of the way. It's really helpful and useful when you're tying this material in, but after that it just gets in your way a lot when you're tying. So I'm keeping my tension on here. The other nice thing about the synthetic quill is that it has got some adhesive on it, so it kind of sticks down a little bit as you're making these turns with the quill moving up. Not as much slippage. From there I'm just going to turn my vise a little bit sideways so I can get right at the base of where we've tied that synthetic quill in. Turn it back. Next I'm going to turn to some hot orange eye stub. We're going to put on the smallest of collars, so I've just got the tiniest little bit. I know on the cameras, especially on a macro level, these little wisps end up looking like a lot more than just a little wisp. So just be careful as you're putting this material on that you don't overdo it, because we really just want a hint. Then I'll slide this up. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down. Some of this will require a little trimming because these fibers have a tendency to want to jump out. I try to take these wraps right behind the bead. Once I've got that down, I'm going to stroke it backwards to try to capture some of those fibers that want to jump over the eye of the hook. From here, let's just go ahead and whip finish this and finish it off. Just take a few turns here. At this point we can go ahead and remove our thread. Finally, I'm just going to add the lightest of coats of some UV resin. This is going to help this pop a little bit, and it'll also make this fly a little bit more durable. Make sure you get the sides and the bottom. And if you get too much on, you can just kind of scrape it off. So I'm going to turn this from side to side just to make sure I get those sides as well. Something that you often miss when you're tying these flies. Although I kind of missed it and skipped it a little bit. More frequently I'll do this UV work before I tie on that collar, but here I'll just be careful just not to get that in there. You can see some extra UV coming down the bottom here. I'm just going to clean off my bodkin and kind of smooth that out. From there I'm going to just grab my UV and get a quick hardening of that shell, just so I don't end up with the UV pooling either at the top or the bottom, depending on how I have that hook in the vise. With that, you've got a very nice additional Chironomid pattern to add to your box. It's got that nice red followed by black ribbed narrow body with the classic white overhang of our Z yarn and a very tight and small bright orange dubbing collar. Very effective fly. Tie it down 18, 20. I often say 22, and I often then follow that by I can't see a 22 to tie on my tippet. I can certainly tie it. I can tie down to 30s because I have magnifying goggles on, but when I get out on the river, there's no way in hell I can get it on the end of my tippet anymore. So I'll stop usually at 18 to 20, because that's what I'll actually use out on the river. So grab yourself a hook, a bead, throw it in your vise, and give this one a shot.